There has been a lot of talk about Final Fantasy 16 and Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth, and the recent information that came out from Square Enix that both games did not hit profit targets, so they did not sell enough. And there's been a variety of different reasonings and thoughts and people saying different stuff. I actually recently had a video talking about it in terms of these problems or terrible situation that's going on with Final Fantasy 16 and Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth sales. Both of these games were massive games with a lot of marketing, a lot of development time and budget, and clearly did not sell up to expectations. But usually people say, oh, Square Enix, they never sell up to expectations, but this actually happened. We're looking at it overall. Final Fantasy 16 has not moved more than 4 or 5 million units at this point, and Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth, they have not even announced the sales of that game. And usually Square Enix will let us know when a game hits 3 million, when a game hits 5 million, when a game hits 7 million, and if a game hits 10 million, they'll definitely let us know. And Rebirth, they haven't even let us know at the first tier, which would be 3 million units, which is definitely concerning for the future of Final Fantasy. But there was an article on GameIndustry.biz, and they talked about how Final Fantasy's sales crisis that they're going through is also an identity crisis problem. And I want to go over what they said here because I think that it's very true, but I also wanted to add what I think that they're going to do to actually fix it. Not something that I'm just suggesting ideas. I think that this is going to happen in order to get Final Fantasy back on track. But before we get into all that, what's good everyone? OJ here. Welcome back to another video. Please make sure you hit that like button, subscribe if you are someone new, and click that notification bell to get all of my RPG videos and more first. Now let's go ahead and jump right into this. Let's talk about what Game Industry Biz had to say in an article, and essentially they summed it up all as this. Those problems all arguably trace back to Square Enix's own deeply held belief that this game is a mainstream pillar franchise, which means that a major Final Fantasy game has to be everything to everyone, a gigantic mainstream hit on a level of Call of Duty or even GTA. But that ignores the reality of what Final Fantasy has been throughout its history. It was at the vanguard of JRPGs, yes, but the moments when the genre and Final Fantasy itself brushed up against mainstream success and acceptance were the exception, not the rule. It's a niche genre, one that benefits from having an insanely devoted fan base and thus lots of merchandise sales and opportunities for auxiliary revenue, but overtly chasing mainstream success requires taking major steps away from what makes the genre appealing to its core fans in the first place. Ironically, even as Final Fantasy seems to struggle with both an identity crisis and a sales slump, JRPGs more generally are actually in pretty good health. Flagship genre titles like Persona and Like a Dragon are very different to what Final Fantasy has become, likely having only a fraction of the development budget for a start, but embracing their genre roots in ways that have delighted fans while also helping to control development costs to some degree. Now, that whole segment right there, there's some stuff that I'm kind of iffy on, but the general gist of what they're saying is that, how I see it at least, is that Square Enix has been taking Final Fantasy as this massive mainstream type of thing. Maybe they don't feel that it's going to hit GTA or COD levels, but this massive mainstream graphics have to be this, have to push the biggest tech, have to have all these crazy set pieces, have to turn it into a super action game where it's not really pushing all the RPG elements, but pushing more of the action and button mashing or whatever the case is, right? This is something that I feel that Square Enix really wanted to do with Final Fantasy 16. They wanted to turn it into a game that maybe sells 15 million units or the reason to pick up and buy the PlayStation 5. It ended up being none of that at this point. So how is it fixed? What do they do? Well, they tried to. They felt that, hey, we have our more traditional type of Final Fantasy that's going to harken back to the old school fans with Final Fantasy 7 Remake and Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth. And then we also have this other game that's kind of different that other people can play that are maybe more into the different types of games and don't like RPGs as much. But once again, just like Square Enix said, or at least they said in their briefing, they actually cannibalized themselves with this because it's on one platform that's still growing in install base, that has a pretty large amount of people that really only play stuff like Fortnite, COD, and Madden, FIFA, or FC, GTA, and those type of games, and aren't really going to give Final Fantasy a chance in the first place. The dynamics have shifted so much at this point, so that was their mistake, which was hard to see back then if you're looking at what they wanted to do, but that's how it's kind of played out at this point. Now, what do they need to do going forward in the future? Well, for me, the big thing and probably the most important thing is, yes, stop trying to appeal to Western gamers or modern gamers. Get that thought process out of the whole scenario. Persona, in addition to Monster Hunter, The Legend of Zelda, I'm sure there's some things here and there, but for the most part, all of these games appeal to people who are going to play them in Japan. And then, of course, that trickles down to everybody else. Monster Hunter, if you look at it on paper, that game does not appeal or try to appeal to the Western modern type of gamer. They made it in a way. They made some quality of life stuff that is pretty cool, but that quality of life stuff can be great for Japanese gamers as well. So stop trying to cater to the modern gamers or the Western gamers with your graphics or with your mechanics or your systems. Truly make something that you feel inherently is going to capture Japan and enthrall them and get them going. And if the hype and the scores are there, I'm telling you, it will be monkey see, monkey do when it comes to everything, because that's kind of how it always is, where they just make a game to where they feel, yeah, it's going to do well here, and then we'll see what happens in other places. Final Fantasy is a Japanese franchise. There's no need to try to sit there and say, oh, we're going to do this and that to appeal to people that probably aren't going to buy your game in the first place or don't care about Final Fantasy. So capture Japan first and then worry about all of that later. The next thing up is that we've talked about this, but obviously not having any type of major big Final Fantasy on the Nintendo Switch was a huge mistake for the branding, especially if you're looking at in Japan. There were so many other franchises, but Square Enix itself, overall, stuff like Dragon Quest that have been huge on the platform, big sales overall, that's absolutely done considerably better. So what you have to look at here is that going forward, you need to make sure that that mistake does not happen. You cannot bank on having a miss like that. Now, once again, I don't really fault them too much, because at the time they were planning all of these big games, the Wii U was in a bad spot. Obviously, the Switch isn't quite powerful enough for what you want to do. Xbox doesn't really have a big support base for JRPGs, so Sony's offering a huge money bag for you to create the big, massive Final Fantasy to reach what you think the game needs to be in terms of a worldwide audience. Yeah, they took the deal, and it made sense, so I'm not really faulting them too much for that. But not at this point. You have a roadmap. You can see how things are shaking out. You saw what happened before. There's no need to make that same mistake again. So going forward, you need to have the multi-platform development. PC is now much more viable for you guys going forward, and the Nintendo Switch 2 has to be an option. There is no ifs, ands, or buts about it. You've got to make that an option for people to be able to get to, because if this thing blows up and your next major Final Fantasy game is not on there, you're going to lose out on millions upon millions of dollars, just like you lost out on millions upon millions of dollars at this point only having it on PlayStation. So that needs to be a key. If you have that where the Switch 2 blows up and you're part of that success and you go back to what made Final Fantasy awesome in the first place, I see Final Fantasy once again capturing a massive audience and not having the situation that they're having right now at this point. So PC obviously isn't as big when it comes to Japan and when it comes to the JRPG genre in sales overall, but it's still a viable option to put on there along with Xbox too. I think Xbox, PC, Nintendo Switch 2, and PlayStation needs to be the way to go in order to further the Final Fantasy brand, the console gaming. So the last part that I want to touch on, and I think that this is probably the most important part because it ties back to everything else, is that you've got to do what made Final Fantasy incredible. I personally feel that turn-based combat, or even something like Metaphor ReFantazio, and Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is not necessarily that, but having something that is a true turn-based with some minor action elements kind of thrown in there would probably be the move for Final Fantasy. That type of game can sell here in the West to RPG gamers, and that type of genre can sell a lot in Japan. Obviously, we know turn-based RPGs can sell a lot. Pokemon sells a lot, a little bit of a different style of turn-based RPG, but it does sell a lot. Obviously stuff like Dragon Quest, that sells a lot. We have stuff like Baldur's Gate. That's not a JRPG, but it's still an RPG, and that sells a lot. So it's not like people don't want to play turn-based RPGs or don't want to play games like that, which I think Square Enix felt people don't want to play those. So we're going to make a action-heavy Final Fantasy game for more of the different base, and we're going to make that FF7 Rebirth to capitalize on the nostalgia, but it kind of blew up in their face. Now, there's also just one little side note before I go back to what I think they can do with things. I do think that they planned it wrong. If they would have made FF7 Remake as an actual remake of the original game with a bunch of added stuff into it, instead of chopping it up into 3 separate parts and spreading it across multiple different generations and platforms, I think that it would have been way better off. I know a lot of people that checked out Final Fantasy VII Remake, saw that it wasn't actually remaking what they felt was supposed to be in the first game, and said, I'm good. I'm not buying Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. And I think that's kind of what's happening here. The story's all mangled up and weird. The ending of Rebirth is really weird, and people are not really understanding things. So I feel that people saw that too and was like, all right, I'm not checking this stuff out, you know. And people saw FF16 obviously not being what Final Fantasy was or what they grew up with. So I think going forward, you need to take that original branding, that original franchise, Final Fantasy 6, Final Fantasy 7, Final Fantasy 8, Final Fantasy 9, Final Fantasy 10. You need to take that, put your brain trust together. What can you do to innovate on what made those games so great? If you need to make a hybrid of action and turn-based, like a Metaphor Refantazio, like a Trails Through Daybreak, then go ahead and get that done. If you feel that you have to do something in order to kind of go back to what made those games great, I think that would be a great option. And I'm predicting that the next Final Fantasy game will be more like that than like what Final Fantasy VII Remake did, which was you have an action game and then you can pause the action in order to do things. It's going to be flipped to where you have a turn-based game, but then there's going to be certain action parts here and there. So I think that's what's going to be happening going forward with Final Fantasy. And I think that if they do that, have it multi-platform, make sure it's on Nintendo Switch 2. They don't have to focus on being the most technically impressive, super big game that costs $100 billion to make. You don't got to do that. Make an incredible game first and foremost, and then all the other stuff will play a part into it. And then, of course, your development costs could go down as well, like the article stated with Persona, in addition to the Like a Dragon franchise. So I do feel that going forward, we're going to see that with Final Fantasy, with Square Enix. I think that they've been humbled a bit with Final Fantasy 16 and Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth. I like these games. I think that they're okay games for the most part. I like FF7 Remake probably a bit more. Yeah, I did like it more than Final Fantasy 16 and Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth from what I played. But overall, there's still plenty of opportunity. Now, there's one more thing that they could do, which I've proposed in the past, and that's splitting off the franchise, where you make one game that's going to be more and appealing to the modern gamers out there, then you make another game that's like what I'm talking about, more of for the traditional base out there. And I think that if you do that, you can kind of have the best of both worlds. If somebody doesn't like one of them, they can say, okay, I'm going to try this one out. And if they don't like that one, they can say, okay, I'm going to play this one. So at least you have something. But the problem is that you have two games that both the fans are kind of just like, it's not what we had before. Yeah, we see the characters and everything, but it's not like what we had before. So I feel that that might be an option for them as well. But I absolutely see them taking the turn-based and action RPG route, like a Metaphor Refantazio, like a Trails Through Daybreak. And I think that that would be a very good move for them. So we might see that with Final Fantasy 17 on the Nintendo Switch 2, PlayStation 5, maybe PlayStation 6, next Xbox, Xbox Series, PC. So we'll see what happens. But what are your thoughts overall on this, guys, about what I had to say about Final Fantasy's identity crisis and how they can fix it? Let me know in the comment section below. All right, guys, that wraps it up for this video here. Thank you so much for watching. I do appreciate it. Please make sure you hit that like button, subscribe if you're someone new, click that notification bell, and check out my other RPG videos and more right here on screen. Thanks for watching. We'll catch you guys for the next one. Peace.